What's up, Movement Masters? It's Shawn, Myszka, Movement Mastery, and OptimizeMovement.com coming to you with another movement lesson. And today's movement lesson is going to be an all-important topic, kind of an alternative topic of one of motor learning that involves the use of a concept that many of you have heard of, referred to as discovery learning. Now, most traditional models of motor learning and motor skill or movement skill acquisition revolve around taking an explicit approach. This means specifically telling an athlete the changes that you wish him or her to attempt to make during the technical displays of movement patterns during drills or exercises. Here, we're often going to find ourselves communicating a great degree or deal of intricate movement details and instructions so that the athlete will become more consciously aware of how to specifically execute a given movement skill and the motor actions that come with it. However, there really appears to be some evidence over the years which shows that an implicit motor approach can sometimes make movement skills more sticky, if you will, and maybe even more or less apt, rather, to break down, such as under fatigue or chaos, since any movement skill acquired through implicit learning will not necessarily allow the athlete to understand all the particularities, all the little details, all those little movement nuances which created the given movement pattern solution. Now, a few approaches to implicit motor learning could include a couple of different things that some of you as movement professionals may have employed in the past. The first one would be using relevant analogies and metaphors for the athlete, such as those things that are going to regard to the outcomes that we want the athlete to find him or herself in during the completion of a task. Or maybe the use of more errorless type training drills, which then get more progressively difficult as that athlete acquires and further fine-tunes the patterns for technical execution. Another example or style of implicit motor learning that I personally often employ, that we're going to talk about today, is then what some would refer to as discovery learning. You know, at its base level, discovery learning really just involves setting up a training environment in which the athlete is then required to essentially independently discover the potential solutions to a given movement problem. Here, during discovery learning, rather than me telling or prescribing the athlete exactly how I want the task performed and how I want that outcome to be completed, I simply construct a learning environment using a constraints type led approach relevant to the dynamic systems theory of motor learning, and then I allow that athlete, repetition after repetition, to essentially try and utilize a variety of different movement solutions to attempt and best overcome the problems that are going to be presented by the environment. And when structuring an environment which essentially employs discovery learning, I will simply start by designing that environment that simulates that in which they are going to find in their sport, or maybe one that just matches the skills that we're trying to acquire on that given training day. Of course, I will begin by using or being relatively simplistic with the task demands, and then gradually adding complexity as the athlete discovers more optimal ways of solving that problem. And really, once I have shown that athlete the drill or the constraints of the drill, I will limit my communication from there and really not elaborate anything further to the athlete than simply stating the movement problem that's present within the environment and leaving it at that and allowing them from there to come up with their appropriate solutions or to test out their hypotheses and theories, if you will. For example, I may set up a drill for, say, a running back or a wide receiver in the National Football League, where I simply tell that athlete the task will involve him going from point A to point Z in any fashion that he desires, as long as he navigates it within staying within maybe a certain boundaries that I have set up. And then the task constraints will involve him avoiding the would-be opponents within the environment and within those boundaries. From there, I will have myself, along with maybe 2 or maybe 3 more individuals, act as opponents and essentially simulate typical movement patterns that are going to be found for the athlete out on the field. So myself and then the other opponents will then run at the athlete at from various places, at various angles, at various speeds, and in performing different tasks, if you will, to essentially deter the athlete's locomotion from point A to point Z. The athlete or the learner then will need to overcome these problems that are presented by the environment by coming up with a variety of necessary solutions to navigate himself through the environment, meaning utilizing the skills of acceleration, deceleration, cutting, changing direction, etc. Now, obviously, every time the athlete performs a drill such as this, every repetition, the actual task execution and the outcomes and the performance are going to be vastly different. But of course, I can personally, as the movement professional then, facilitate or change the constraints or aspects of the environment with the expectation that the athlete's response is going to be different, that the execution of the task, the solution, will be organized in a different way that is more maybe to my liking, more to my proposed model of optimization. Hopefully here you can kind of see what I'm talking about or visualize with me in regards to this example. Now, I will say that I do prefer to use this discovery learning, this implicit motor learning, with more explicit motor learning methods as well. But I will often have training days that are completely dedicated and devoted to discovery learning, at least for my higher level of mastery of movement athletes. That said though, I also elect not to use discovery learning until I'm quite confident that the athlete himself or herself and I have made prerequisite adjustments to the actual sensory, perceptual, motor control or motor landscape of commonly executed movement patterns. So their biodynamic structure of movement patterns that I may want to see emerge in combination with other movement patterns during the use of the discovery learning type task, I will want a certain degree of solidification. So I know I can trust the athlete in regards to the ownership of that pattern and the performance of it. All in all though, what I find with discovery learning is that the athlete will often have greater ownership of the motor patterns which emerge or those that are learned during the discovery because the athlete, him or herself, created it. Thus, it's often easier to then tweak because the athlete seems to believe in it maybe at a little deeper level. In addition, when I take the shackles off, or when the shackles are removed of this restricted technical execution in my instruction, and I kind of allow that athlete free reign of the movement strategies and their behaviors, they sometimes surprise me with what types of solutions and combinations they'll come up with and really what types of technical display will emerge. And this is a pretty cool thing then, because then this is something that is much more organic, it's much more authentic, and it likely allows that athlete to be a more virtuous mover in the chaotic environment of sport because they created it. Which, this virtuous movement, this masterful movement in the ever-changing environment of sport is exactly what I'm after as I attempt to raise that athlete's level of control and coordination and really overall movement mastery. That said, though, if I notice a movement strategy or the biomechanics that occurred during this discovery learning task is one that is inefficient or ineffective or contains dangerous compensations, I will then do one of really two things. I will either tweak the environment on the subsequent repetitions so that athlete is forced to make their own adjustments to his or her technical execution and strategies, or maybe I will just then use it as a teaching moment with the athlete so that they can gain greater error detection and hopefully then subsequent error correction from it and then raise their level of mastery from that mistake or from that pattern that then emerged. Overall then, the use of discovery learning really, to me, offers several significant advantages that us as movement professionals need to be aware of, and it keeps it in our movement toolbox. First, it really allows that athlete to independently explore optimal solutions to the movement problems that could be presented to them within their sport, and then that can lead to ownership, while also at the same time minimizing the role of myself or other movement professionals from a person who is focused on specific instructions to a person who's more focused on facilitation. Thus, in my mind, this really makes it all that much more likely that the athlete will not become reliant on me as a movement professional and instead become a more independent mover, one with greater ownership. And all these things to me are good things. They're all benefits. They're things that could equate to a greater likelihood that the athlete will be able to replicate and reproduce that movement solution when and where it counts, which is in sport during competition. So I thought it was definitely worthwhile for us to address here today, for you to think about and maybe try to utilize a little bit more discovery learning, a little bit more implicit learning, and try to see what kind of movement patterns and what kind of combinations you can get to stick for your athletes once they get out in the chaotic, ever-changing environment of sport. So for another movement lesson, this has been Shawn Myszka, Movement Mastery and OptimizeMovement.com. Till next time, I'll talk to you guys then. And until then, let's continue to master the art of optimizing movement.